Dale watched his daughter's face crumple on the video call, Brenda's shrill accusation still echoing from the small speaker. "Mom says you cheated," Sarah choked out, tears running free. He felt exposed, stripped bare. Then Brenda's voice, colder than ice, cut through the silence. "Don't bother denying it, Dale. Everyone knows." The divorce email had landed, a final period on 23 years of sentences Dale had never intended to write. He stared at the screen, the official language confirming what he already knew. There was a hollow ache behind his ribs, a space where something familiar, however broken, had resided. Relief sat beside it, a quiet, almost shameful guest. Miller Tile and Remodeling, the name on his new business cards, felt small, the lettering stark against the white. The debt that came with it felt heavier, a constant press in his gut. His phone buzzed. Sarah's number. He answered, already sensing the tremor in the connection. "Dad," she began, her voice tight, brimming with tears. "Mom just called me crying." "What the hell did you do now?" Dale closed his eyes, pressing a thumb against his temple. "Sarah, your mother is saying things." He tried to keep his voice level, calm. "She wanted to keep me around, keep her options open, even while seeing other men. That's what this is about." A choked sob came through the line. "I wish you were never my father," she spat, the words cutting through him with a surgical precision he hadn't expected. The line went dead. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid splashing against the ice. It burned a familiar path down his throat. The words, "I wish you were never my father," echoed in the quiet of his small kitchen. His mind, unbidden, drifted back. Not to the beginning, but to the start of the end, which he now understood had always been there, woven into the very fabric of their first encounters. He was on his knees then, in the Richardsons' master bathroom, the cool porcelain of the tub fixture glinting under the work lights. He laid intricate marble tiles, each one aligned to a fraction of an inch, the grout lines perfectly even. Precision was everything in this kind of work, a quiet satisfaction in the exactness of it all. Cody, his apprentice, a kid barely out of high school, fumbled a bag of spacers behind him. The plastic clattered against the floor, scattering beneath the sink. "God damn it, Cody," Dale muttered, his voice low, a controlled release of annoyance. He didn't look up, just kept his focus on the tile in his hand. His work phone buzzed in his pouch. It was Brenda. Her voice, when he answered, was clipped, impatient. "When are you going to be done today?" No warmth in it, just the flat demand for information. He gave her a time, the conversation brief, unsatisfying. He remembered when her voice had held a different cadence, a different promise. He'd first met Brenda when she was just 18, Arthur Caldwell's daughter. Arthur had been Dale's boss back then, a gruff man who built half the subdivisions in the county. Dale had been reviewing blueprints in Arthur's office, fresh out of trade school, when Brenda walked in, a little lost, a little too confident for her age. Arthur had caught Dale's eye as she left. "That's my daughter, you hear me?" he'd warned, his tone low and serious. Dale had just nodded, unsure what to say. Brenda started showing up at job sites after that, often with coffee, sometimes just to talk. She'd lean against a door frame, watching him work, her smile a little too inviting. Dale, who was dating Beth at the time, kept it polite, professional. Beth was steady, planning for their future, talking about moving to Chicago for a better opportunity. One afternoon, Arthur cornered Dale by a stack of lumber. "I've seen you talking to Brenda," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Leave my daughter alone, Westbrook." Dale had stared at him, genuinely confused. "I'm not chasing after her, Arthur. I'm with Beth." Arthur just grunted, not quite believing him. At the company barbecue a few weeks later, Martha, Arthur's wife, a woman who rarely minced words, had cornered Dale near the grill. "Beth's a nice girl, Dale, but Brenda's got ambition. She'll inherit Arthur's company one day." She dismissed Beth with a wave of her hand as if she were swatting a fly. Later that evening, Brenda found Dale by the picnic tables. She talked about business school, her genuine desire to join her father's company, her plans for growth. It wasn't the flirting, but the ambition, the clarity in her eyes, that had caught him. Beth eventually gave him the ultimatum: Chicago or her. Dale couldn't leave. Arthur had given him a good a steady paycheck, the chance to learn the business from the ground up. Leaving felt like throwing away a future he had already started building. They broke up, Beth moving east without him. Drunk a few months later at some bar he couldn't quite remember, Dale ran into Brenda. One drink led to another, then one date, then intimacy, then the undeniable fact of pregnancy. They were married 4 months later. Sarah was born 7 months after that, a tiny, red-faced testament to a future he hadn't planned. A life that had begun not with a choice, but with a series of accidents. For 14 years, Arthur Caldwell had given Dale the hardest jobs, the most intricate custom builds, the repairs no one else wanted to touch. It felt like a subtle, unspoken punishment, a way for Arthur to wear him down for marrying his daughter. Yet, through each demanding project, Dale had learned. He mastered the precise cuts of a miter saw, the careful setting of foundation forms, the delicate art of finishing drywall so it was smooth as glass. He became indispensable, a craftsman whose hands knew the language of wood and stone. Brenda, for a decade and a half, had been a good wife. She cooked hearty meals, made sure the laundry was done, and tolerated his long hours on job sites. She'd always battled her weight, a constant cycle of diets and backslides, but her efforts to make a home had been consistent. When Sarah started school, Brenda took a job at the county library. It wasn't for the money, she'd said, but for the benefits and to have something of her own. Their 15th anniversary passed without much fanfare, a quiet dinner at home. A few weeks later, Brenda's cousin Darlene moved back to town with her latest boyfriend, Randy. Darlene had always been loud, a magnet for trouble, and Randy seemed to amplify her worst qualities. Their presence quickly became a disruptive force. Brenda started changing. She adopted Darlene's critical edge, her voice taking on a sharper tone when she spoke to Dale. The house, once meticulously kept, began to show signs of neglect. Dust gathered on the shelves. Meals became an afterthought. Cooking, once a regular ritual, became a rare occurrence. Most evenings, Brenda was out with Darlene and Randy, leaving Dale and Sarah to fend for themselves. Sarah, not yet a teenager, had learned to make scrambled eggs and heat up canned soup, a skill born of necessity. Dale finished the Richardson job, the last marble tile set, the grout meticulously wiped clean. He stood up slowly, a dull ache blooming in his lower back. 45 years old, and the body was starting to send him eviction notices. But the work was solid, beautiful even, and the pride in his craft remained. He pulled out his phone and called Arthur. The old man's breathing on the other end of the line was labored, a wheezing sound that reminded Dale of a failing engine. 2 years ago, Arthur had suffered a stroke, a massive one that left him partly paralyzed. It had come just days after Martha, Brenda's mother, received her stage 3 breast cancer diagnosis, a 1-2 punch that had leveled them both. Martha, frail herself, had somehow found the strength to care for Arthur during his recovery, pushing his wheelchair, feeding him pureed food. Brenda's brothers, Mike, Tom, and Jim, had helped where they could, but Brenda had presented herself as Martha's constant support, always there, always saying the right things. But Martha had lost her battle 6 months ago. The house felt empty without her, and Arthur, though still clinging to his control at the office, his wheelchair pushed in daily, seemed to have lost his will. His spirit diminished. "Job's done, Arthur," Dale said, keeping his voice steady. "The Richardsons are pleased." "Good," Arthur rasped. "Send them the invoice." The line went dead. Dale pulled into his driveway. As he opened the car door, a faint aroma drifted on the evening air. Pot roast. His stomach rumbled in anticipation, then clenched with a sudden, sharp suspicion. Brenda hadn't cooked a proper meal in months, let alone a pot roast, one of his favorites. He stepped inside, the scent growing stronger, pulling him toward the kitchen. Brenda emerged from the living room, a smile on her face, a dress he hadn't seen in years clinging to her slightly fuller frame. Candles flickered on the dining room table, a bottle of wine uncorked beside them. "Dinner's ready," she said, her voice softer than he'd heard it in ages. "Thought we could have a date night." Suspicion coiled in Dale's gut. A cold knot, but a flicker of hope, faint as a distant star, still caught in the darkness. He sat down at the dining table, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows. The pot roast was tender, the potatoes soft, just the way he liked them. Brenda talked about her day at the library, about Darlene's latest drama, her voice light, almost too cheerful. He picked at his food, watching her, searching for something he couldn't quite name. Later in bed, Brenda's hand found his, her touch tentative. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. He felt her attempt at intimacy, but the wall between them was already built, thick with months of neglect, and now the raw concrete of his suspicion. He turned away, the resentment a bitter taste in his mouth. Brenda pulled back, a sharp intake of breath. The air in the room seemed to crackle. "What is wrong with you, Dale?" Her voice, usually soft for these moments, was now sharp, edged with accusation. I really try, and you just shut me out. Do you have any idea what I've given up? Everything. For you, for this life. I'm not happy, Dale, and it's your fault. She pulled her arm away, rolling onto her side, facing the wall. Just then her phone charging on the nightstand buzzed. A man's voice, low and hurried, came through the speaker. Dale heard it clearly. "Brenda, call me back. I need to talk to you, just a friend." Dale's head snapped up. His suspicion flared into a cold burn. "Who was that?" he demanded, his voice flat. Brenda didn't answer. She just threw the covers off, her movements stiff with anger, and stormed off to the bathroom, slamming the door. The phone, still buzzing faintly, lay on the nightstand. He looked at it, then at the closed bathroom door. A compulsion he couldn't fight took over. He reached for it, his fingers surprisingly steady. He opened the text messages. It didn't take long. Messages from Hank. The words were explicit, undeniable. Each one a hammer blow to his chest. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Missed you last night." He scrolled through, his eyes blurring, the world tilting on its axis. And then, there it was, a message that stopped his breathing, froze the blood in his veins. "Brenda, are you sure about this? A baby changes everything. My baby. Our baby." His world didn't just tilt, it shattered. Pieces of 23 years of marriage, of a shared life, of every assumption he'd ever made rained down around him. He felt nothing and everything all at once. A deep, bone-weary numbness settled over him, even as a raw, primal scream threatened to tear its way out of his throat. He stood by the bed, the phone heavy in his hand, then walked to the bathroom door, pushing it open without knocking. Brenda was splashing water on her face, her eyes red. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm, pulling her back to the bedroom. "Who's Hank?" His voice was a flat monotone, a stranger's voice. "And what's this about a baby?" She tried to pull away, her eyes wide with fear, and something else he couldn't quite place. Shame, perhaps, or desperate calculation. "Dale, please, let me explain." "Explain what, Brenda? Explain this?" He shoved the phone in her face, the incriminating text stark against the bright screen. She sagged, all the fight draining out of her. It's Hank from work. It just happened, and the baby. I was going to tell you." Her voice was a whisper, a plea. "I swear I was going to tell you. It's a mistake, a terrible mistake." Her words were just noise. He didn't hear them. He didn't want to hear them. "Call him, go be him," Dale commanded, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "Call Hank, now." She hesitated, then picked up the phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. She put it on speaker. Hank's voice, confused at first, then firm, came through the tiny speaker. "Brenda, is everything okay?" "Hank," Brenda whispered. "Dale knows." A beat of silence. Then Hank's voice, clear and steady. "Brenda, I told you, I want to be with you. I want to be with our baby. Tell him." Dale stood there listening, the confirmation slamming into him like a physical blow. He handed the phone back to Brenda, watching her face crumble. He walked out of the room, past Sarah's closed bedroom door. He couldn't be here. He couldn't breathe here. He grabbed his keys. "I'm going for a drive," he told the empty house, the words barely a whisper. The truth burning a hole in his chest was all he could carry. Dale drove. The dark rural roads unspooled beneath his tires, endless ribbons of asphalt cutting through fields of sleeping corn. The dashboard lights cast a faint glow on his hands, gripping the steering wheel. Pain and anger twisted in his chest, a tightening knot of raw emotion. The air conditioner hummed, a thin, meaningless sound in the vast silence that had fallen over his life. He pulled over on a gravel shoulder, the crunch of stones loud in the quiet night. He needed to talk to someone. His thumb hovered over Jim's number. Jim, his older brother, always practical, always tough-minded. He answered on the second ring, his voice raspy with sleep. Dale, in clipped, detached sentences, laid out the facts, the affair, the baby, the betrayal. Jim listened, the silence on the line thick and heavy. "Hell, Dale," he finally said, his voice devoid of pity, just plain fact. "You gotta make her choose. Him or you, the baby or your family. She can't have both. Make her choose." The words hung in the air. Dale stared out at the blackness beyond the windshield, the distant farm lights, tiny pinpricks in the expanse. Divorce. The word felt like tearing off a limb, or trying to stay, to somehow glue the shattered pieces back together for Sarah's sake. He thanked Jim, hung up, and drove back toward the house. He found Brenda in the kitchen, sitting at the table, her face puffy from crying. Her eyes were wide with panic when he walked in. "Dale, please," she started, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. I swear. We can fix this. Please think about Sarah, our family." She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his skin prickling at her touch. Sarah, her face pale, appeared in the doorway, drawn by the hushed, urgent tones of her parents' voices. Her eyes, wide and confused, darted between them. She was caught squarely in the middle, an innocent bystander in their crumbling world. He saw the distress in her posture, the way she clutched the collar of her worn nightgown. A deep love for Sarah warred within him against the molten anger and broken trust Brenda had inflicted. He wanted to shield her, to make the world right for her, but he couldn't even make it right for himself. Brenda, sensing his hesitation, pushed. "We could go to counseling, Dale. We could talk to someone, work through this." Counseling. The word felt hollow, but he looked at Sarah's anxious face. For her, he would try. For her, he would walk through the fire. He nodded, the movement stiff. "Fine," he said, his voice flat. "But if this is going to work, you have to be honest, completely honest." The counseling sessions began. They were a farce. Brenda sat across from him, her posture rigid, her answers evasive. She deflected every direct question, twisted every accusation back onto him. It was his long hours, his lack of attention, his coldness that had driven her away. She blamed him for her loneliness, for her choices, for her unhappiness. She never once took responsibility for her own actions, for the choices that had brought Hank into their lives. Dale sat through it, his jaw clenched, listening to her weave a narrative of his failings, his shortcomings, a story where she was the victim, and he, the villain. One evening after a particularly grueling session, Brenda dropped a bombshell, her voice disturbingly calm, almost detached. They were in the kitchen, the remnants of Sarah's homework scattered on the table. "I'm keeping the baby, Dale," she said, her eyes fixed on his, "and we're going to tell everyone it's yours." He stared at her, speechless. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking depth of her deceit, to carry another man's child and to lie to their daughter, to him, to everyone, and to assume he would simply go along with it, pretend it was his. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. The cracks in the concrete of their marriage had just become a gaping chasm. Dale stared at Brenda, his mind struggling to process the words, the sheer audacity of her proposal. "You want me to raise another man's kid?" His voice was a strained whisper, barely audible. "And pretend it's mine, while you sneak around with him on the side? Is that what you are saying?" He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold. She shifted, avoiding his gaze. "It wouldn't be like that, Dale. We'd make it work, for Sarah. Think about Sarah." "No," he said, his voice gaining strength, firming into something she rarely heard. "This isn't negotiable. You end the affair. You get rid of the baby, or I'm divorcing you. There's no other option. Not now, not ever." Brenda's eyes welled up. She tried to manipulate him, pulling at old threads. "After everything we've been through, 23 years, Dale, all the sacrifices, the good times, you can't just throw that away." She reminded him of their early struggles, the small triumphs, the life they had built together. The words, once powerful, now sounded hollow, mere instruments of deceit. Desperate, feeling the ground crumble beneath his feet, Dale did the only thing he could think of. He drove to Arthur Caldwell's house. Arthur, still frail, sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the autumn leaves. Dale, without preamble, laid out the truth. Brenda's affair, the pregnancy, the other man. Arthur listened, his face slowly turning a mottled red. His eyes, usually clouded by illness, flared with a terrible anger. "She did what?" he rasped. "My own daughter?" He pushed his wheelchair back, a guttural sound escaping his throat. "She's disowned, finished, no share in the company, nothing." Brenda, when confronted with her father's wrath and the looming specter of financial ruin, finally broke. The thought of losing her inheritance, the security of Arthur's company, was a potent weapon. She reluctantly agreed to his terms. The affair would end. The pregnancy would not continue. A fragile, uneasy truce settled over the house. Dale felt a flicker of hope, a desperate, fading spark, that they might salvage something for Sarah. But it was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing suspicion, a low thrum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He knew instinctively that nothing would ever truly be the same. They told Sarah that Brenda was pregnant. "But we're working things out," Dale added quickly, watching his daughter's face. Sarah looked confused, her brows furrowed, but also visibly relieved. The tension that had hovered in the house for weeks had finally found a target, a resolution, however grim. Brenda underwent the abortion a week later. Dale did not accompany her. He couldn't bring himself to be there, to witness the final awful consequence of her betrayal. He stayed home, working in the garage, the rhythmic clang of his hammer against metal doing little to quiet the turmoil in his mind. Life resumed a tense, artificial, normal. Brenda seemed to try. She cooked a few meals, though the effort felt strained. Her distance, however, was palpable, a wall that had grown taller and thicker. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken accusations and unresolved pain. Dale, unable to fully trust, found himself checking her phone when she left it unattended, a habit he hated but couldn't break. He scrolled through messages, searched call logs, looking for any sign, any hint of another deception. He found nothing, and yet the suspicion lingered. Then Brenda started talking about classes for her library job. Professional development, she called it. They would require her to be away late evenings, sometimes entire weekends. He listened, his heart sinking, knowing what this could mean. It was a familiar pattern, a repetition of the past, and he was powerless to stop it. Brenda's classes became more frequent. At first, it was just late evenings, a few hours after the library closed. Then it stretched, requiring her to be away until close to midnight. Soon after weekend trips, she claimed, to workshops in other towns. Each new excuse felt thinner, more transparent than the last. Dale's suspicion grew with each passing day, a dull ache behind his eyes. He'd ask, his voice carefully neutral, about her studies. Brenda would wave off his concerns, blaming it on stress from exams, from the intense curriculum. Her tone implied he was being unreasonable, unsupportive. He started noticing a dark sedan, unfamiliar, parked a few blocks away from their house. It would appear on the evenings Brenda was supposedly at her classes, always at a distance, always seeming to watch. He told himself it was just a coincidence, a neighbor, but the knot in his stomach tightened each time he saw it. One Tuesday evening, after Brenda had left, claiming a mandatory seminar, Dale pulled out of his driveway in his own truck, keeping a careful distance. He watched Brenda's car take the familiar route out of town, past the gas station, past the county line sign. His headlights cut through the gathering dusk. She didn't turn toward the community college or the larger university campus an hour away. Instead, she veered off onto a smaller road, one that led to a cluster of motels and a truck stop. He watched her pull into the parking lot of the Red Roof Inn, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the twilight. His breath hitched in his throat. Hank's truck was already there, parked in the corner, a dusty red Ford F-150. Dale killed his engine, sinking down in his seat. He watched Brenda get out of her car, a small overnight bag in her hand. Hank emerged from his truck, a wide smile on his face. Dale watched them embrace, a lingering, intimate hug that confirmed his deepest fears, twisting them into a cold, hard certainty. The classes were a lie, all of it. He drove home slowly, the anger and the pain a familiar, unwelcome companion. He found Brenda in the kitchen, humming as she put away groceries. He walked in, his voice quiet, almost devoid of emotion. "Who's Hank, Brenda?" He watched her stiffen, the color draining from her face. "And how far along are you this time?" She dropped the bag of apples she was holding, the fruit scattering across the linoleum. Her breath hitched. Then she crumpled. The tears came, hot and fast, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She confessed everything, the words tumbling out in a broken stream. She couldn't let him go. She loved him. She was pregnant again. The abortion hadn't changed a thing. She swore she was going to tell him, just like before, but she hadn't known how. Dale listened, a profound numbness settling over him. It wasn't shock this time. It was a sickening certainty, a deep understanding that the marriage was irredeemable. Her deception was complete, woven into the very fabric of their existence. There was no coming back from this. Not for him, not for Sarah. "It's over, Brenda," he said, his voice quiet, calm, each word a stone falling into a deep well. "I'm filing for divorce." Her sobs abruptly stopped. She looked up, her tear-streaked face contorted with rage. "You blame me for this, don't you?" she shrieked, her voice rising. "It's your fault, Dale. You were never around. You were always working. You drove me to him. You drove me to this." She lashed out, throwing accusations like knives, trying to inflict the same pain she felt. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked away, past Sarah's closed bedroom door, and into the small spare room at the end of the hall. He pulled an old duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. He started packing, folding shirts, rolling socks. His movements were deliberate, mechanical. He knew this was the real end, the final irreversible cut. Emotionally drained, a hollowed-out shell, Dale called Arthur Caldwell a third time. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection, as he laid out Brenda's continued affair. The classes, the motel, the second pregnancy. Arthur listened in silence, a heavy, rasping breath, the only sound on the line. When Dale finished, Arthur let out a slow, painful sigh. "Bring her to my office tomorrow, Dale," he rasped, his voice weak but laced with an unyielding resolve. "I need to speak with her. And you." The next day, Arthur, pale and trembling, sat at his large oak desk, Brenda standing stiffly opposite him, Dale positioned by the door. In a final, painful confrontation, Arthur's voice, though faint, carried the weight of a lifetime of decisions. "Brenda," he began, "you have disgraced our name. You have betrayed your husband, your daughter, and this family." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "You are disinherited. You will receive nothing from me, ever." Brenda gasped, her face turning white, but Arthur held up a frail hand, cutting off her protest. He then turned his gaze to Dale. "My will is revised," he said, his voice firmer now. "Everything goes to Dale and Sarah. Not just for this, Brenda. Your brothers, Mike, Tom, and Jim, too. They have disappointed me over the years, shown no real interest in the company, only in what they could take. You're all cut out." Dale felt a pang of conflict, a heavy weight settling on his shoulders, but he saw the raw conviction in Arthur's eyes. He accepted the burden, the immense responsibility that had just been placed upon him. After leaving Arthur's office, Dale sought out Hank. He found him at a new construction job site, swinging a hammer, oblivious. "See?" Dale walked up, his presence a dark shadow. Hank looked up, startled. "We need to talk," Dale said, his voice low, controlled. He laid out the truth, the 2 pregnancies, the lice, the manipulation. "Stay away from my family, Hank," Dale finished, his gaze unwavering. "Or you'll regret it." Hank stared at him, genuinely surprised. His hammer slowly lowered. "Wait," he said, his brow furrowed. "Brenda told me. She said you were okay with it, with us, that you had an arrangement. She said you were both just staying together for Sarah." The full, shocking scope of Brenda's calculated deceit, the layers of her lies, finally dawned on Hank. He stood there, speechless, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The divorce proceedings began. Brenda, a bitter, manipulative shadow of her former self, wasted no time weaponizing Sarah against Dale. She twisted events, painted herself as the victim, and transformed Dale into the villain who had torn their family apart. Sarah, caught in the crossfire, absorbed her mother's narrative. Mom says you never loved her, Sarah accused, her young face hardening, her eyes filled with a pain that ripped through Dale. She says you made her miserable. Each accusation was a fresh wound, but Dale fought. He fought for his daughter, for what was right, for the truth that Brenda sought to bury. His heart broke with every one of Sarah's words, but he knew he couldn't give up. He had to stand firm, even if it meant walking through fire alone. A few months after disowning Brenda, Arthur Caldwell passed away peacefully in his sleep. His business, lacking his stern hand, began to wind down. The remaining projects slowly completed, the assets liquidated. Dale watched from a distance, a sense of an era ending. He'd respected Arthur, even when the old man had been a difficult boss. Now a new chapter began, not just for the Caldwell legacy, but for Dale himself. With grim determination, he officially started his own company, Miller Tile and Remodeling. The name was plain, honest, like the work he intended to do. The will reading was a tense affair, held in a stuffy lawyer's office. Dale sat beside Sarah, who at 16 tried to appear unfazed by the somber atmosphere. Brenda was there, rigid in her seat, flanked by her brothers, Mike, Tom, and Jim. The lawyer's voice was dry, professional, as he read the final stipulations. Arthur Caldwell's considerable estate, his properties, his investments, his remaining business assets, all of it, was to be divided solely between Dale Miller and Sarah Miller. Brenda, Mike, Tom, and Jim were explicitly and unequivocally disinherited, a fact stated with legal precision. The room erupted. Brenda's face twisted with a primal rage. Mike cursed, Tom slammed his fist on the table, and Jim stood up, red-faced, pointing a trembling finger at Dale. "You stole it!" Brenda shrieked, her voice hoarse with fury. "You manipulated him! You robbed us!" She sued. A thick envelope arrived a few weeks later, filled with legal papers. Brenda claimed mental anguish, fraud, undue influence over an ailing old man, and demanded a significant portion of the inheritance. Dale looked at the papers, a weary sigh escaping him. He knew this was coming. The lawsuit dragged on for years. It was a painful, drawn-out affair, a grinding process of depositions, hearings, and motions. Dale spent countless hours with his lawyer, reliving the betrayals, presenting evidence, watching Brenda lie under oath. It was expensive for both sides, a slow bleed of resources. Brenda, without Arthur's financial backing, gradually depleted her meager savings trying to fight a losing battle. Each court appearance was a fresh wound, forcing Dale to revisit the deception, the affair, the pain. Eventually, the judge's ruling came down. Brenda lost. She was left with nothing but significant legal debt, a mountain of bills, and the bitter taste of defeat. The judgment was clear. Arthur Caldwell had been of sound mind, and his final wishes were to be honored. Isolated and desperate, Brenda tried to reconcile with Sarah. She called, she sent letters, attempting to spin a new narrative, painting herself as the wrong party, Dale as the cruel husband who had taken everything. But Sarah, now older, with a clear head and a growing understanding of the world, finally saw through her mother's manipulations. She remembered the arguments, the late nights, the emotional distance. She remembered Dale's quiet presence, his unwavering support. Tired of the schemes, the emotional blackmail, Sarah made a decision. She moved in with Dale. Their relationship, scarred by years of tension, slowly, carefully, began to heal. There were quiet evenings, long talks, a gradual rebuilding of trust. Dale watched her grow, a smart, resilient young woman, and knew he had done the right thing. Brenda was left alone, financially struggling. Her dreams with Hank, whatever they had been, had crumbled under the weight of her deceptions, his own discovery of her elaborate lies. He had wanted no part of her complicated mess. Years later, Dale stood in his thriving business office, the walls lined with awards for quality craftsmanship. Miller Tile and Remodeling had built a solid reputation. He looked at a framed photo on his desk. Sarah, bright-eyed and smiling, a college graduation cap on her head. The scars of the past remained, etched deep, but a quiet peace had settled in his heart. He had paid the price, a heavy one, but he had rebuilt. Years passed, the seasons turning over the Midwestern landscape, each one bringing its own changes. Dale's business, Miller Tile and Remodeling, became a fixture in the community, known for its dependable craftsmanship. He built it from the ground up, tile by tile, just as he rebuilt his life. Sarah thrived, graduating from college with honors, eventually starting a career in the city. Their relationship, once fractured, had mended into something strong and quiet, a bond forged in shared experience and renewed trust. Brenda's name seldom came up. She had vanished from their lives, a consequence of her own making. The inheritance was a ghost she chased in her own mind, a phantom fortune that haunted her solitude. Hank, too, was gone, another victim of her elaborate deceptions, a man who eventually realized he was simply a tool in her schemes. Dale rarely thought of them, or the past. The scars remained, a part of his history, but they no longer bled. He had paid the price for choices that were not his own, for a marriage built on shifting sands. But he had endured, he had built, and in the quiet rhythm of his work and his daughter's life, he found a hard-won peace.